Now, can everybody hear me? Yes. Very good. So you're in for a treat this evening, especially being at the Maritime Institute. It seems a great opportunity to have our next guest be able to share with us a little bit. So I'd like to introduce you to Zachary Danley, and it should be midshipman Zachary Danley. And he was born in Texas. He grew up in Kentucky. He's one of the members of the inaugural class of cyber operations majors, and he founded the Cyber Initiative Club. It also seems like his team won one of the cyber defense competitions this year. Is that one of those beat Army type things? Yes. Yep. But I know those cyber defense competitions are pretty intense. So those are a little bit more than what we're talking about with our Cyber Patriot. So that's a challenge within themselves. But he's going to talk to us a little bit about the initiatives at the Naval Academy, and also the initiatives that they have with their freshman class that we might be able to take away some thoughts with, and then also with some of his own work that he became really passionate about this in trying to reach down into earlier grade levels. So I'm going to turn it over to Zach.
So it would appear, even beyond the cyber defense exercise, I chose the right service, as we're gaining some new domain territory this weekend, so that'll be nice for the Navy to expand inland with the coming storms. But what I'm excited to share today is the core curriculum of cyber that the Naval Academy has developed, and that it implements to all of its students. Whenever we look back at the history of what matriculated and precipitated this new program, it really starts with the President's 60-day cyberspace policy review. 2009, this was the time period whenever President Obama decided that cyber is going to become a core staple of the presidency. And being in the military role that we are, that then became our core principle. And so looking at that, we knew that in the verbiage that said expand and train the workforce, we are part of that workforce, and I would argue one of the most moldable spots in our military career. So whenever we looked at when is the best opportunity to do exactly that in the cyber domain, the Naval Academy was a very natural place to start. So in 2010, the core academic group at the Academy sat down for the security curriculum options, and essentially what they came up with is, okay, we know we need to do this, but how are we going to do this? And whenever they looked at how they're going to do this, they split it up into two courses. There's an initial cyber course, and then a follow-on cyber course that all midshipmen will have to take. And then that began August 22nd, 5 years ago. Whenever they looked at what they want to accomplish, it's the education of midshipmen for three core areas. The first is the cyber infrastructure and embedded systems. It's very natural to see why that would be so important to the Navy, with all of our platforms and almost all of our weapon systems being critically integrated with cyber technology. That was a very core idea, even beyond how are we going to secure this, just the knowledge that it exists within those systems. Secondarily, the inherent vulnerabilities and risks that come with networking these platforms. There's plenty of capability and there's plenty of desire and functionality that comes with networking and that comes with advanced computer systems, but it's critical to also understand what vulnerabilities integrating those bring. Finally, whenever we know the infrastructure exists and we know those vulnerabilities, how do we defend it? And whenever we look at how do we defend it, that's something that we are becoming ever more cognizant of. In fact, earlier this year was the very first time a commanding officer was released from his position of command because of a cyber breach. It wasn't the IT people, it wasn't the people managing the networks, it was the commanding officer. And the reason for that is they are now likening cyber to the physical system itself, which I think we could all agree is a very natural explanation. Through all of these, the goal is simple. For a midshipman to understand the benefits, consequences, and risks. And I think the benefits is a part that didn't really need to be teased out. I think we can see how amazing cyber is and how amazing guided weapon systems are for ours, and then even the ability to network people, and I know we talked a lot about the humanitarian aid benefits and the communications capabilities. Across all domains, the benefits are almost self-evident, but I think the pieces of the consequences and risks are because of you all being integrated even more into the discussion, and that's what we're trying to do as well. So to accomplish this, they set up this structure. So the SI 110, which is a course number, is the Introduction to Cybersecurity Technical Foundations. It's a semester-long, 16-week, 3-credit academic course that all midshipmen, 1,000 per year, have to take as a part of their mandatory graduation requirement. And I know we talked, that's kind of unique from a lot of the programs that I know you all have talked about quite a bit here, where rather than trying to be something where high school students get interested in this space and it propels them to a career in this, we have English majors taking this, history majors taking this. You have chemistry majors. All of those people are also alongside undergraduate level computer science majors and IT majors. Everyone, regardless of your major, takes this class. And I think that's really what makes it, once we go through how it's set up, so unique. Because it did have to be modular enough to meet all those demands, but also difficult enough to challenge all of those demands. And then it is the precursor to the follow-on program, which is not, interesting enough, not run by the Cyber Center, but rather run by the Electrical Engineering Division. And that is the applications of cyber engineering. Focuses on those embedded systems, the circuits themselves. And I think that's a very natural follow-on. And I think you'll see as we go through it how we prepare midshipmen to take that course. We look at the outline of what's taught. I'm not going to read all of these, but I'll leave it up here for a little bit for you all to look through it. But it's fairly robust. And the unique thing to think about is whenever we talk about steganography, a lot of English majors just look at that and kind of break it up into the 2 Latin roots, and they can tell you generally what they're imagining it'll be. Pictures, study of picture words. So it's a unique experience to bring people up to speed on the cyber domain as it applies to them. But I know we were talking about in our panel, it's kind of an odd teaching dynamic because it's almost an inverted knowledge that we try to teach the students. I know we kind of likened it to a student happening to understand quantum mechanics, but not knowing what the periodic table is. So we have students coming in who can play with their iPhones and get it to do all sorts of amazing things, can build their own websites, but really they just think it's a Tumblr spot. And they have no idea how any of it works at the most foundational level. So whenever we think about how do we teach to this inverted triangle, whenever we look at all these things, the students understand them, they just don't know the titles to them. And so that's really the connections we're trying to draw for the students. And while we do build off the Naval Academy is somewhat slanted towards the technical, so even if you're an English major, everyone does take a rigorous enough core curriculum of engineering and mathematics that we all graduate with Bachelors of Science. So it's very unique to have a Bachelor's of Science in English, but you do if you come from the academy. And so that is the one little caveat to this, but I am confident you all know or have students who, whenever we go through this, you can see them going through it. And I think that is what turns all these things into practical applications our students are able to work with. So the landing page. This is the first thing students see whenever they pull up this website. And I went ahead and marked it for you all because it's completely available from the open web. So anybody, anywhere can access this. It's not on our personal domain. It's not behind anything other than a web browser. And whenever you come to this, it breaks it down into 4 key areas. You have the calendar, which we'll go through, the course outline, resources, and then finally information. And what we tried to do with this is, because we put it on the public domain, and all of this is completely available, and we'll get into more how you can integrate it into your classroom. But we wanted students to be able to access this while they're going through the class, but also this reference piece in the resources, I think is critical because it's a place they can go back to. I know we even laugh a little bit, but there was an ensign, which is once we graduate from the Naval Academy, we become O1s in the Navy, our very first billet. They were talking about how they had to go through an information security class. And they were laughing at the fact that they could go back to this and they had all the resources they needed to not even go to that class and pass it, because it all exists. So this is a great trail back for the students who leave, but remember the core lessons they learned here. So looking at the very first iteration, the calendar. So as you'll see, which is the same thing you all can access from anywhere, every single one of these links goes to a page that runs through that lesson. The lesson has, sometimes it's interactive. All of it is built off of the computer science department at the Naval Academy, ABET accredited. The information here is 100% educationally sound. As well as you'll see links to all the homeworks. All of those are live and working links that you are 100% available to download and print and distribute to all your students. Already pre-made, ready to go homeworks, and at the end we'll talk about where you can reference, but all of the answer keys and the teacher packets on how to explain those homeworks are also freely available in the public domain. As you'll see, the next thing we also have is the labs. We'll go into what a lab looks like, but again, those labs, other than the hardware or infrastructure required to run it, which is usually possibly a network, one is a router, some Ethernet cables, all of the lab as well as the teacher instructions on how to run those labs is freely available. All of that can be accessed, again, completely in the open source, and then there is a shared drive we can give you access to with all the teaching materials. The resources. This, I think, is one of the most fundamentally powerful tools we have. So if you can kind of look through this, I'll give you a little bit of time to look, but essentially all of the things, if you think, if I'm a security professional, I'm thinking, I'd like to show somebody some functionality in the cyber domain. You have it here. SSH clients, virtual machine logins, you have different shifts, you have all this software links directly to software loaded onto the server, so you can download all of these software things you see here, such as a Wi-Fi inspector, the browser, the hex editor, all of these things can be downloaded directly from the servers right from this website. All of it's 100% available to you. One of my favorite references we have is the XKCD. If you guys are familiar, as a very integrated nerd, one of my favorite comics. But essentially, the practicality of this I love. So we actually have to have, as I'm sure you can imagine as DoD employees, an incredibly robust password. Well, this produces passwords that will be accepted by our DoD systems. And as you'd imagine, and a lot of times, students try to come up with these words, and the humorous comic here essentially says, by the time you get to it, if at the end of the day, you just have something such as staple battery horse, correct horse battery staple, this you'll not only be able to remember easier, but it's more secure in the end than possibly even some of the very convoluted things which require a drop of blood, a DNA sample, and 52 random characters. And this tool, completely available for midshipmen. So we actually laugh, people will come back to this, they have to change their password. Say, oh, where can I get that? Oh yeah, the SI-110 page. Pull up the password generator, click generate password. You just slide this until the entropy level is where you need it for your command, and then you're good to go. And so another example, very practical resource available and taught to midshipmen throughout this course. Some more resources we have. A CISA shift table, very simple, very fun thing that students can begin to learn about. Okay, what is cryptography? Some of the most basic and historic levels fall here. And then immediately, as soon as we show them how to make a cipher, we show them how you break it. Frequency analysis. So it's very humorous. Everyone will make all these, what they assume is somewhat secure messages, and immediately be terrified and tear up their sheets of paper, knowing that the classmate sitting next to them can now use this and break it. One of the things we actually utilized as a part of our cyber defense exercise is there's a built-in interactive firewall that you can set some rules for and build. If anybody's familiar, Snort, it's a tool that you're able to build firewall rules for. This is somewhat based off of this, so it doesn't show it here, but it actually give you what the Snort rules will look like. And it's interactive in the sense that I continue to add and drop different rules, and I can continue to test my firewall until my external hosts are set up correctly, my file server is set up correctly, and my DNS is able to be accessed. So students are able to interactively go through this, and again, completely available on the site as one of those resources, and they can interactively begin to learn how this space really works. Because students are very familiar with dropping requests from firewalls, which is what they receive whenever they try to go to YouTube and it gets blocked during study hour. And then once they go through this, they said, oh man, firewall rule exception. And it's an unfortunate learning curve that they find that there's no way around it. But it's a good learning curve because exactly like we were saying, they understand the fact that every now and then I can't get to YouTube. I know the what. I know what is happening, but I don't know the why. And so this course begins to tease out the why, and students can begin to do it themselves. Additionally, an IP address converter for doing some of the interactive firewall work. And then a very useful program, which I've actually used quite a bit, an interactive batch interpreter for JavaScript. So building a website, testing the JavaScript is something that gets very tedious. This will do it for you, spit out any errors, and display for you on the page what would happen if this ran in your HTML. So again, whenever we talked about how do we engage English students, but also how do we engage computer science students, the resources are part of doing that. Where an English major sees this and they say, okay, I'm going to try this. But then a computer science student can copy and paste his whole code that runs the shopping cart on his page into here and get a similar result with error messages. So this scalability is built into the resources, but also, as we'll get into, is built into the labs. So the labs. As I was alluding to, the Build a Website lab. This is actually my roommate, who's a history major's website. So as you can see, it's a fine website. You know, for a very first attempt at HTML, fine website. Now we also have students who I was describing on the Naval Academy. There's a SQL server, so a database server any midshipman can access, including midshipmen in this introductory course. So if you're familiar with it, if you did in high school, you could probably build the whole SI-110 website again if you wanted to. That's that scalability. Or you can be like my roommate Max and build a very colorful, personalized website, which he has. Moving forward to build a LAN lab. This is very cool because it's one of the first times students understand how the internet actually physically plugs into their computer. So they set up firewalls through the router that only send certain packets to certain computers. They can physically plug in and understand, okay, now I'm plugged into the network, now I'm off the network. They can change the different subnet masks, which determine which network you're on, and go on and off receiving and not receiving traffic. And that's because they're finally able to contextualize what they've been practicing their whole lives. And then moving it up a little bit further, we do that same thing, only now we remove the cords. And students learn, okay, Wi-Fi, and this is a mind-blowing time for a lot of people, is the same thing as plugged-in internet, just without the wires. And now whenever we move, now they start talking about signal attenuation. They start putting things in front of the router and boxing the router into a lead box. Now we don't get internet. Why? Because it's physically coming as radio waves, and it's 802.11. And moving from there, we move into a certificates lab. Certificates is very unique because there's plenty of breaches and plenty of case studies to go off where this has gone wrong. So this is a great lab to tell students, here's an example. The Iranian case is the one that stands out most vividly, I would say. So you had this case, Black Tulip, where you have all these Iranian certificates that are being stolen, how that actually happened. Students will make their own certificates, and then by trying to log on to different pages, they can say, okay, how come you got to log into my page? Well, because I'm a certificate authority. Any certificate I say is good is actually good. And so this is where students can begin to say, oh, that's actually not that hard. And then I think it gives them appreciation for the difficulties of security in this space, because as the blue team, as defense, we have 10,000 things we have to consider. Where offense, I'm going to start at the easiest, I'm just going to go down till one works. And that asymmetry is something students can begin to appreciate, and then whenever they get to their ship, instead of saying, hey, why can't I get on Facebook in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? Oh, that's right, certificates. So it begins to give them an appreciation for the security and availability. I think one of the labs that students enjoy the most, because a lot of students who come to the Naval Academy are fairly destructive in nature, is the network recon lab, which essentially within virtual machines, the only rule is there are no rules. So students attempt to get into there's a blue and a gold team for Navy. Blue team is defense, gold team is offense, and they try to hack each other for 30 minutes. Now, it's very funny whenever people begin to hack. Unfortunately, a lot of people we're working through exactly what a virtual machine is. So as soon as they log on, they think they're on the other team's network. So they just delete everything they can find on their computer, try and destroy them. They're actually still on their computer. But we work through that. And you get to a spot where students can actually have a contest. And at the Naval Academy, contests we compete for everything. If you're eating dinner, it's whoever can do it fastest. If you're going upstairs, whoever can do it fastest. So whenever we look at this, students are able to first start by reconnaissance, which anybody who's ever had the chance to do a red team, or if you just logically think through how am I going to break into a network, you start with reconnaissance. And so they do that. They go through, do a lookup for the blue team, and they try and find, okay, where on the internet are they? And the students now, by this point in the class, understand how networks work, because they've done the network plug-in lab. So they say, okay, I need to find both the router and the specific IP for the computer I'm trying to go to. But I have to consider the subnet mask to make sure they're on the same network. So students are beginning to apply everything they've learned through the course. Moving on, now let's map it. This is very intuitive. So now I'm somewhere on their network. I don't know where. Let me shine the flashlight around. So again, we prepare them with these tools like Nmap. If you're familiar, what essentially it does is it tries to talk to everyone. And anyone who talks back puts a little node and responds, hey, this person talked back to me. And then students up on the whiteboard, so you have the whiteboard, they're frantically writing down all the different IP addresses at work. And then immediately they Google search, I know the IP, how do I destroy? Which doesn't return any valuable results, but they try nonetheless. And now they're working, okay, now how do I get into the web server? Now I'm here, I know that people are here, here, and here. I've been told by my teacher they have this vulnerability, now how do I exploit it? And then they begin to do website reconnaissance. So now I'm on the website, I'm on the web server, what can I do? And essentially our teacher gave us the rm/star, which essentially is, once you get on the physical computer, if you type this in, it'll delete everything. So essentially people are frantically trying to get somewhere and just typing in rm* every time they got somewhere new. So we worked through that issue, but now students understand, okay, if I'm on a red team, which unfortunately Navy military officer we usually never get to do. We're usually only the people unfortunately hearing about the failures, and we're on the blue side. But now we know, okay, whenever I'm in charge of a blue team, something happened. Instead of, oh my gosh, how in the world could something possibly go wrong in cyberspace? I say, oh, I can't believe you guys have been doing so good. Like, this is unbelievable, the work you guys have been doing so far, because students understand how you go from not knowing anything about a target, you discover it, you map it, you exploit it, and then you change it. And this is kind of the culminating event for students where they take all the things they've learned, all the context they know, and then apply it in a scenario. Now, one of the most unique things about the Naval Academy's SI 110 program is the leveraging of a message board for almost all of the communications between the teacher and the student. And I know we were talking earlier the utilization of social media as kind of the fear piece. So whenever we think about how can we engage students, if you can show them vulnerabilities in something they frequently use, I think they appreciate it more. And almost all students utilize social media. So whenever we go to look at, okay, this is a message board. What else looks like a message board? And as I kind of annotated CSS and web pages, a lot of instructors will make their message board look like Facebook, look like Twitter, because it's very easy with CSS. All the functionality behind it is pretty rudimentary. So the students will all, day one, create an account. They will make a super secure password, which inevitably is never super secure. They will then go to this message board and they can begin to post things. All things they've done before. They're familiar with this space. And that is a lot of the advantages. It's hands-on because the students are typing in. The teacher can post code to run in their different machines. Collaborative, a teacher can ask a question, the student can respond with an answer. It's adaptive because you can go from very structured schoolwork, and this is probably the 3 p.m. time frame, and then this structures over to about the 8, 9 p.m., and right about here you're at about 10 p.m. at night. And as you can see, the functionality of the message board has shiftly changed as the instructor left somewhere about here, and students were left to their own devices here. And the reason we use this is because you can teach so many things through a context students understand. So we start with authentication and cookie. So like we said, students give a super secure password, and we say, oh, what if you right-click on that? And then they go in here, and they can look at the cookies, and the cookie stores their password. And then we can go in and put a Wireshark on there and look at what's being sent back and forth. And because it's HTTP, we can look directly at what the password is. And students say, do other websites use that? And the answer is yes, yes they do. Do other websites store cookies like that? Well, you now know how to find out. They now have the tools to see if the things they were always using, assuming they were secure, are secure, at least at a fundamental level. And this point talks a little bit to the students say, why would you ever store stuff like this? It's easy, and because you demanded it. I don't want to put my password in again. Store his cookie? Yeah, do that. Let's do that. Now they know what that means. That means I can left-click on a web page and see a password. So students begin to appreciate, again, availability and security. Maybe I won't click remember my password. Maybe I won't accept all those cookies next time. We move on because students are able to post on the page. Very soon after the page becomes operable, it becomes inoperable because somebody inevitably has figured out some way to either turn the whole rest of the page into just comments, or they delete the page itself. Again, destructive nature. As soon as we build it, they try to tear it down. So you have things such as adding photos, which is the very first challenge we have. Add a photo to the message board. You have things such as this, which writes I'm cool 100 times. And as soon as this works, about 12 more zeros are added, and then the page no longer works. And then as we go through this, as it says right here, the instructor slowly begins to add security. And they tell the student how they're doing it. So one of the very first things they do, which is the very first thing all websites should do, is this input validation. Okay, if you ask the students, what is something you have to have for this code to work? They say, well, you have to have the less than greater than sign. Well, what if we just didn't let them post any of those? And then immediately, both of these become inoperable. And the question inevitably comes, well, do all websites do that? And the answer is, you now have the tools to find out. And that's the piece that students begin to understand. They are now being taught ways they can go out on what is the open internet and understand how secure the spaces they are using every single day truly are behind all of the design people put in front of them. The most practical and the most fundamental to the Navy is the phishing lesson. And I think if you go back through the last 10 largest security breaches, I'd say the vast majority of those were not highly technical in nature, but highly personal in nature, highly human-centric. And this is one of the biggest pieces for that. Students are very well aware that phishing is bad, but what is phishing? So students get sent an email that has this embedded. This is the link instead of the link to go to what usually says super cool YouTube video, click here, which is way more enticing to 18 and 20-year-olds than you may imagine. And whenever they do click on it, my SI 110 professor is a doofus gets posted to the message board. Well, how in the world did that happen? Well, what did the link say before you clicked it? And students now can hover over this link and see down at the bottom where they're actually being redirected to isn't YouTube, but is to this place. And then they say, wait a second, but I didn't log in. Ah, but you remember those cookies? Ah, now you see you were already still logged in. Now students begin to put it together. Okay, so then they think, if I get an email in the future, what are the implications this could have? And that's the space we're trying to get students to. Because like I said, all students take this. So really, this could be the beginning and the end of somebody's cybersecurity career. And so whenever we think about that, our end goal isn't so much to leave them with the awe of the cyber domain and a desire to investigate it further. It's really just an appreciation and an understanding that this domain is a lot deeper than what they see. And this is one of the most practical ways we do that because students understand, okay, I hear about phishing all the time, but how does it actually work? And they have become, in a controlled environment, a victim to a phishing attack. And they can say, I now understand. And that's the space we're trying to get them to in the end for all of these sections. Now, one of the most notorious ones is passwords. So again, the power of right-clicking is something they also really begin to appreciate. So you right-click and say View Page Source. And the teacher says, do you see anything interesting? You come down to this very handy comment. I almost never comment my code, and I argue because it's a security feature. My teachers don't agree, but I think this is an argument for my case. So read and store password file. Students say, oh, password.txt. And earlier on, students had been taught what we call URL injection attacks. So I go somewhere that they didn't expect me to because there's not a link to it. But students begin to think, okay, it's on the server. Just because it isn't linked there doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So students know somewhere along, we go to password.txt. Well, what if instead of index.html, I click password.txt? And kindly enough, this comes up, and all the plain text passwords that were stored there are now free reign to the students. And the question they always ask, well, but real companies don't do that, do they? Oh, well. Actually, they most certainly do. So then we go to the case study. 40 million users, passwords stored in the plain text. Hackers found the plain text, probably thought that they had a week ahead of them to crack all the passwords, and nope, it was handed to them. And inevitably, this case study leads right into password security. So unfortunately, these aren't counts of passwords, that is the password. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the most common password used on RockU. And students inevitably say, oh yeah, that's a terrible password, as they pull up the change your password. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the second most common. And they say, oh no, mine went all the way to 9, so that had to be, oh, okay, well. And then they add a 0, and they're like, now I did it. Hey, that's not up there. And then, of course, password, it's so obvious it's not obvious. Well, actually it is. And then, kindly, I love you. But the point for the students is they now see that something that's very easily accessible to them is actually something somebody else had already done. And I think that's, again, the case where they begin to say, wow, are my passwords stored like that? And they begin to ask those questions. And now we get to the relatability. So students look at this and they say, okay, we bring them to this page at the end of the course. What do you see here? And then they say Facebook. And we say, okay, think broader. And somebody finally says, that's a message board. That's the right answer. This is a message board. What have you been working with for the last 16 weeks of this course? A message board. And so students begin to see, instead of just Facebook, they see users, passwords, and authentication. They see injection attacks and cross-site scripting. Students now can take something they knew about, then they broke it all the way down, and then they built it all the way back up, and now have a fundamental restructured understanding of how this page not only works, but should be built. And I think that's the place we try to get students to. And the challenge is we have to take students who, again, English through CS, we have to get them all there. They all have the same end goal, but I would argue some of the CS paths go way over here and then they come back, which is fine, they learn. And then English takes the most direct route. And then finally, we get students to understand the broader implications of this space. Now, why do we do this? Why is DoD interested? I think the top quote is something that you probably could not exaggerate even if you wanted to. The dependency we in the DoD have on these systems is ever increasing. And I think even as recently as the OPM hack, the security we treat them with is nowhere near the par it needs to be. And I fundamentally believe that is an issue coming from the foundation, which is students who grew up not really caring because it worked, not asking, does it work, and is it secure? And that's the availability and security. Everyone appreciates availability. If Facebook goes down, I'm thoroughly upset. If my password has no critiques on it, I don't care about that. In fact, usually, if my password has to have a lot of characters to it, I'm more upset. Availability is going down. I'm only happy when availability is going up. But after this course, students begin to appreciate the give and take availability and security have. And they can begin to understand whenever we're dealing with phishing emails to the government public sector being at the top of this list, and whenever you look at the threat map of the daily and really by the minute attacks that are coming against all sorts of services, there's an appreciation for, okay, we need this space and we need to look at the security behind it. The necessity, I think, flows very nicely with that whenever we look at the potential cyber threats moving all the way up to nation states. the level of danger and impact. Whenever we look at this, the potential for these cyber threats continues to increase, and so does the level of danger and impact. And this one's very interesting to me because this is the space that I think is growing the most. The terrorist utilization of this space. And we say that, and the caveat to that is, what are the ages that are usually recruited in these different extremist events? Usually around the exact same age that we're recruited for the military. Reasonable, getting to that age range. And so the unique thing is because of the cyber domain, we're seeing a shift in a lot of the things we used to see in traditional space, whether it be recruiting, funding, propaganda, even for terrorism, and even for malicious nation-state actors, that's moving towards a familiar cyber domain, sometimes even to social media. And I think whenever students begin to contextualize this, they recognize this space is one that I have particular interest in because I'm a digital native. And I and all the students you teach understand this space so intimately because it's something we deal with every single day. It's something we touch probably every single minute. And so whenever we begin to think about how do we engage those students, I think that piece is being able to talk to English majors and to CS majors equally saying, hey, you guys both use iPhones, Androids. You both have these in your hands and understand their usefulness, but you understand the security behind it. And I think that's really what we're getting to whenever we look at K through 12 cyber education. And so specifically for the Naval Academy, the way we think about education, which I think is a fine model for the same way we can apply it to K through 12, and is the model that I've personally undertaken to begin my work in the K through 12 realm, is this all many few. So all professional core competencies and 2 required cyber courses. I consider this cyber hygiene. Everyone should have cyber hygiene. Knowledge of what a password is. Knowledge of what HTTPS is. Knowledge of very basic things that whenever they go on and traverse the internet or purchase hardware or do anything interacting with the cybernetic realm, they're able to say, okay, I have a question. And that question is the start of an investigation that can bring them to confidence that whatever they're doing is secure. And then we move into the mini. So this is the activities. So I lead the Boys and Girls Club initiative for cyber. And so what we do is we're working with Google CS First to bring computer science after-school programs into the Boys and Girls Club across America. And what we're doing is bringing it into this mini phase, where a ton of the students love games. And Google CS, I don't know if anybody's familiar, but CS First, they're doing great work in building game-like scenarios to teach cybersecurity. And so whenever we look at the mini, these are the people who are interested in the space, but want to do it as a hobby. And I think this is really the space that is lacking attention. Because we understand, okay, everyone needs cyber hygiene. I agree, that's something that's universal. And we want more people majoring in computer science and becoming cybersecurity specialists. That's awesome. But we also need CEOs who appreciate data security. That's the mini. We also need, for me, I want aviators who are flying the jets to understand they're actually in a computer system. And you want surface warfare officers who are driving the ships to understand they're dependent on the communications technologies that are coming from space. And so whenever you look at how do we begin to grow the mini, how do we begin to grow people who are in non-technical professional fields but have a relationship and understanding of what security in the professional relationship world looks like. And then very, I think, critically, the few. These are the people who are the professionals in the domain. These are the people who are day-to-day fighting the fight in the public sector and the private sector to begin to retake control of this space from the malicious cyber actors. I think the work you all are doing in that space is invaluable. And I think beginning here, we all start here. And then we move our way up. And I think that's where the K through 12 education begins, is the fact for the students that, hey, we want you here. It would be great if you were in the mini, and we are happy to educate you to the few. But I think that's the piece that I see from my end. I want to tell the students, if you like cyber but you don't want to major in it, that's fine. You can be an English major who appreciates computer science. I think that's an absolutely fine space to be, and we need more people in that realm who are generally knowledgeable about that space and that begin to operate within it. So the contact information. I think this may be the most valuable slide I put up here compared to anything else I talked about. So Captain Paul Tortora established the Center for Cybersecurity Studies at the Naval Academy. It's become a center of excellence, and what he is seeking to do is to take this curriculum, all of which, like I said, is available in the public domain, all the teaching manuals, all of the teacher instruction, all of the ways to build the labs physically, he will hand you on a shared drive. There's even talks that he may be willing to send people to your schools to teach the teachers how to do this. And why? This was created as a DoD asset. As a Naval Academy, through funds, we know cyber is important. And what we fundamentally understand is that the DoD depends on private sector security as well. And so your students, no matter where they go, are part of the overall national cybersecurity posture. And that's because they are users of this space. And every user can either be a stalwart of defense or a potential attack vector. And so that's why this is open source, that's why it's completely in the public domain, and that's why we're willing to pour the resources into you all to be able to have this free of charge. So the entire curriculum, the calendar, the resources, the information, the outline, all the homeworks, there's a 6-week exam, a 12-week exam, and a final. All of that is already built. So whenever you think about having to make the test, no longer an excuse, already built. And they have 5 iterations of tests that you can pull from. And even if you wanted to do it, feel free to pull from this as you'd like. Maybe you like one of the labs, you want to get that lab and integrate it into your course. Awesome. Maybe you really like the final and you don't want to write another final. Perfect. We have 5 years worth of them that you can pull questions from. Whatever these resources can be for you, please utilize them as such, because that's why they were built. That's why they were released copyright free into the public domain, to increase the overall cybersecurity posture of our nation. And that is a core desire of the Department of Defense, of the Navy, and most certainly the Naval Academy and the Cyber Center. This is my contact information. Anything else I could pass on to you. Love working with the K-12 realm, do a lot with the Boys and Girls Club. One of the members on the STEM steering committee, which is our science, technology, engineering, and mathematics outreach program. We do a ton of visits to schools to help engage students as a near peer. Getting out of the near peer realm, which is odd for me. I think I just heard 2020 is getting ready to enter high school. That's on eyesight. Can't comprehend it as a graduation year. But as we get there, we are happy to send students to motivate your students. Hey, I'm in this realm. I am a cyber operations major. I love it. Here's why. Here's how you get involved. We're happy to do that. My contact can be utilized for that. Anything we can do, again, to help you helps us symbiotically, because we're both in the same fight and we're both in that same domain. So please let me know. I'll come back to this slide, but as a shameless plug with the game coming up tomorrow, go Navy, beat Air Force. I think it goes without explanation. But just to end, if I could throw in a plug, so this was after we won the cyber defense exercise. Mr. Chris Inglis, former deputy director of the NSA, incredible, and on the steering committee, and one of my professors. The professors at the Naval Academy are intimidating enough, not to mention the courses they give us and the tests, but that's a whole different issue. So this picture has a lot of story behind it, as if you remember last year, through some miracle, Air Force won the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. Well, they were actually at the White House was open to the service academies for the presentation of their trophy. Mr. Inglis found out about that, mentioned to the White House press secretary, the cyber team is available that day. So what you don't see in this photo is the Air Force team is actually off camera, not getting the attention with the president after winning the Commander-in-Chief's trophy, because he heard we won the cyber defense exercise. So what you don't see is all the unfortunate faces looking, and I think this picture is actually very indicative of the overall national posture towards cyber. I think the president opened up the opportunity to come and meet him after the cyber defense exercise, because that's how important it is. That's how critical this is to this space. And so shameless plug for the game coming up on Friday. And then we can head back to the contact information. And I am happy to take any questions now. Like I said, I know it was up there at the very beginning, but if you want to access that landing page, all you have to do is Google search USNA or United States Naval Academy, and then it's SI 110. SI110 is the course number. So USNA and then SI110, and you can find it. And most certainly, if you contact Captain Tutora, he can give you that link and any more resources. So looks like we have maybe about 20 minutes. Looks like I'm right at about maybe 15.
Okay.
Yep. Any questions or anything we could provide more clarity on? Happy to do that now. Yes, sir.
So are you teaching Windows or Linux?
So we actually teach both, as well as iOS. So again, whenever we're trying to do this, some students like Apple iPads. Some students use Windows, and unless they already know what Linux is, nobody uses Linux, really, that comes through this course. But again, for the knowledge of this space, knowing just the word Linux and knowing what it entails is a critical asset to students. And really what that means is one day whenever I'm out in the fleet and somebody says, sir, this is a Linux box, we have to do X, Y, and Z. There's an appreciation for what that means. And that appreciation is really what's important. But absolutely, Linux is introduced to the students. Yep.
No other questions? Or are you just in awe?
I know I'm not that good. We'll leave that slide up. I think you guys got the contacts.
What does the flag say?
Oh, the flag says "Don't give up the ship,"
Oh, okay.
which we got this flag signed, and now it hangs in our. We actually have a war room back at the academy. We used to try and do this in one of the computer labs, but if you've ever tried to do any of these defense exercises in a computer lab, it's very difficult. So we actually got a whole room dedicated to this, which is now mainly filled with empty Monster cans, but that's just indicative of the space. Yeah.
Red Bull and Monster cans.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. No endorsement for either, but you guys are great.
Any other questions while we have,
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
What was it that got you started interested in the topic? What, how old were you, and what was the trigger?
Absolutely. So, fortunately enough, my father's here, so he's been in this space for pretty much ever. Started with radios, which is an appreciation of its own, that radios kind of gave birth to the cyber domain. But a lot of it was 100% this introductory course. So before we go through this introductory course, we don't technically know what we want to do. I thought I wanted to be an aerospace engineering major. I went through this course. I saw what the cyber domain meant. And then I actually had the chance to meet with Captain Tutora. And if any of you do have the chance to meet with Captain Tutora, you will absolutely understand why I had no choice but yes. That cyber was my future. And I give all the credit to the Cyber Center and to this course for putting me on the track it did. And then my father, of course, for giving me that start.
other questions? I just can't believe that this group doesn't have questions. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Yes. Of course, how much effort do you let them know, an appreciation that they're going to have to continue to educate themselves throughout their lifetime?
Yes, sir. Now, that's actually a fantastic question and one that we are still working through. So once students go through the SI110 course, the knowledge they have is very, what I would call, in the tradecraft realm. So it's not, they do have tools, but as you all can appreciate, those tools depreciate in value, and the space itself grows so quickly. So that's a fantastic question. The way we follow it up very tactically is with that follow-on cyber course. And really from there, cyber has actually become a core tenet of training in the Navy. So we do annual cybersecurity training, annual information awareness training, and that kind of keeps us going. But I know for a fact that before you go through a course like this, whenever you have to go through and answer all the questions, like, oh, you have to make a 15-digit password. Why am I doing this? Like, this doesn't have value to me. But I think what this does is it provides that foundation for a future of learning. And that foundation is because now that I know the why, you can tell me the what, because I can draw it back to that. But that's a great question. Yes, sir.
What type of other courses are part of your cybersecurity major?
Absolutely. So as the cyber major is developed, it's actually very unique in the fact that it brings in computer science kind of foundationals. It brings in IT concepts and networking. But then the aspect, which I know we were just talking about, the human element it brings on top, I think is what sets it apart. So we actually have classes in social engineering and hacktivism to learn how strongly the human persona can affect this space. We also have law and policy classes taught by Mr. Chris Inglis. So he says there's no right or wrong answers, but I know there are. He just isn't telling us. And then we have opportunities to do very operational classes with things like the CDX. How do you carry out a SQL injection attack on a secure server? Because once you know the red team, the blue team flows naturally. This is what we're going to prevent. We also have, of course, foundationals and networking. We do a follow-on website and databases course. So very close to what you'd see in a CS and somewhat of IT, but we take it again from that tradecraft level. So we have a data structures course, for instance, but we don't go all the way down into building it in C. We build it conceptually if you're familiar in Python. So fundamentally, we understand the concepts, but maybe not so much in application. We do a hardware and architecture course. We understand and learn the assembly language, but we don't program in it. So we know it and we appreciate it, but we learn, okay, hardware, what about the supply chain? So now we learn about, okay, supply chain security. Where's these hardware pieces coming from? So I think that's really what sets the major apart from the other two. It's almost like we liken it to mechanical engineering, the foundation of engineering. This is a branch off of that. So this is what we are doing in the cyber operation. And if you're familiar with ABET, the accreditation board is working to bring our program on as one of the very first accredited under cyber science. And so they imagine information assurance to be a cohort to cyber operations. We focus much more on how are we going to maneuver in this space. They focus, okay, much more on how do we protect and defend this space. So I think there's plenty of room for growth. I think it's challenging, as always, but I think we have a pretty good model. It's an iterative model, so we are the very first graduating class to ever come out of it. So we have plenty of feedback, and then they're going to take that feedback and run it through their system, and then iterate through. And the class of, I guess now 2019, is getting ready to put in their selection preferences for who would like to join. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
How much operational relevance do you draw upon the Navy's information dominance?
So IDC, great question. We have the truly unparalleled opportunity to, over the summers, do operational cruises with the Information Dominance Corps. So we have opportunities to go up to Fort Meade and sit with the people in the Navy who are doing this to defend our nation. We have the opportunity to go to NICWEDGE, which is the Naval Naval Cyber Warfare Development Group. Have the opportunity to learn how is this space being advanced. I had the very fortunate opportunity to go down with one of the SEAL teams to learn about, okay, how do our most kinetic force leverage the cyber domain? So really the way we integrate is through those internships. And then we also, the majority of our professors are military. Not all of them. The majority of our CS classes are taught by professors, doctors, PhD computer science, and then a lot of our operational courses are military, which come from the IDC, come from Fort Meade, come from NICWEDGE, and even some come from the different agencies around DC. I think locationally, you can't find a better place than the Beltway to begin to start a program K through 12 and at the undergraduate level because of the human capital and resources you have in this area. So, yes, ma'am.
Any courses in EW in the electromagnetic sector that complement this?
Yes, ma'am. So we have a full, another 16-week course only for cyber majors, but it is in communications and electronic warfare. So it structures very much on how do you physically turn electricity into data. And a lot of that also deals with propagation. And uniquely, as I talked in the follow-on course, the follow-on course that all midshipmen have to take also deals with that. Again, it's peripheral to their overall because that is, again, the all, many, few. They're more in the all category, so it's very rudimentary, the EW that all midshipmen get, but again, it's that appreciation. But for cyber operations majors, we take a full course that focuses on communications and EW. Yes, sir.
Are you encouraged or is there any kind of guidance on certification for any of the students?
So the Naval Academy has a great relationship with the SANS organization. So midshipmen are able to, over their spring break, over Christmas break, or over the summer, go to any of the SANS courses. You have to register for them, but through that, I'm actually GX certified. And then if you're familiar at all with some of the geospatial, so Geo has a certificate as well. We had the opportunity to get certification in that as well. Certification for us is really an opportunity to take what we've learned and kind of prove a litmus test. Okay, what do I know compared to industry professionals? And I think it's comparable. We definitely need to go through these courses. And if you're familiar at all with SANS, amazing opportunity to learn and to get a great framework for future study. But certifications are mainly that professional development. So you can go through them on your own. Naval Academy has great chances to do that on their dime, and SANS is happy to let us come to those courses if our instructors pay for those courses. So we have a great relationship with them, and I have leveraged that over last summer, went to the SANS fire course in Baltimore. But that's the main area for certification. Yes, ma'am.
Do all of the armed forces have something like this?
So, West Point and Air Force do have the cyber defense team, but I think they, and I can't speak factually on it, but what I do know for a fact is we're the only service academy that has this major. I know the other service academies on DoD policy are focusing on training their students, but again, I'm 100% giving credit to our location and to our staff who stood behind this on the shoulders of Mr. Inglis, Dr. Tortora, Captain Tortora, Dr. Hagarat. Some huge minds and figures in this space got together locationally again because they were in the DC, Baltimore, Annapolis area and started this. So I think, I don't know if we're further ahead, but I'd say I think we have the best framework. Yes, sir.
If I could offer you, so the Air Force does through the Air Force Institute Center of Excellence for Cyber Center of Excellence. They also do it through innovation centers that they have established both in Silicon Valley and at the Air Force Academy, and they do offer majors in this, and they're continuing to grow their program.
Yep. And as you mentioned, the Defense Innovation Unit is the DoD's bridge to the private sector. They are doing incredible work in this space to begin to figure out how we're going to leverage kind of private sector maneuverability and knowledge with DoD assets and capabilities. So